deportations. His orders created an open season at the border. Millions of economic migrants, drug smugglers, human traffickers, and other bad actors have answered his call. A culture of lawlessness has taken over, punctuated by the Biden administration's complete and utter failure to enforce American immigration laws. Sadly, the Biden administration has refused to take accountability and so has refused to reverse the course. House Republicans refused to succumb to this failure in leadership. Earlier this Congress, we passed H.R. 2, legislation to combat illegal immigration and ensure operational control over our southern border. Today, we take up 4 additional bills that will help restore order and the rule of law to ensure that law enforcement, particularly the agents of Customs and Border Protection, are supported in their mission to keep our communities safe. Last year, Customs and Border Patrol agent Raul Gonzalez was doing his job, and he was tragically killed in pursuit of illegal immigrants who were fleeing law enforcement in a motor vehicle. High-speed chases started by those breaking our laws are not uncommon. Yet at present, those who initiate these high-stakes situations do not face any specific criminal or immigration consequences. That changes with H.R. 5585, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act, which makes it illegal to flee from Border Patrol and law enforcement agents. The penalties instituted by the bill include prison time and ensure that perpetrators can be deemed inadmissible and deported from the United States. Preventing deadly accidents that endanger lives is also the focus of H.R. 6976, Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act. With the turn of a key, an intoxicated driver commits a crime. Criminal and illegal migrants are no different. This legislation creates a new ground of inadmissibility and, in certain cases, deportation of migrants who drive under the influence of drugs or alcohol. In a similar vein, with identification fraud on the rise, H.R. 6678, the Consequences for Social Security Fraud Act, will ensure criminal or illegal migrants who commit Social Security and ID fraud can be removed and barred from the country. Finally, we will take up H.R. 6679, the No Immigration Benefits for Hamas Terrorists Act. In October, the world watched in horror as Hamas, a designated terror organization, committed a vicious and evil attack on Israel. 1,200 Israelis, including American citizens, were murdered, and another 240 were taken back to Gaza as hostages. Terrorists who participated, planned, or otherwise supported the October 7 attacks should not be admissible to the United States, full stop. There is no reason for a member of Hamas to ever be admitted to the United States. H.R. 6679 will make that a reality and ensure that we can prevent these deadly and evil people from ever entering our country and visiting the same type of tragedy on our people. Taken together, eradicating these gaps in our legal recourse will deter criminal activity and ensure that bad actors face appropriate punishment and disbarment for their crimes. I will now yield to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, to make any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for beginning this hearing by recognizing the 3 American service men who lost their lives in Jordan, and we pray for their families, and we also pray for those who have been wounded in that attack. Mr. Chairman, we've been hearing for months that Republicans care about border security. Bills every other week about the border. None of them ever become law. Press conferences and visits to the border amounting to nothing. Speeches and lectures about the border, all for show. Claims that Democrats don't care about border security, which is categorically false. But today I'm genuinely shocked because the Senate, at the urging of President Biden and in a bipartisan way, is working on an immigration bill to address border security. From what I hear, it's a tough bill, a bill that has things in it that I think might cause me a lot of angst. I'm not sure once I see the text if this is even something I can support. And what Republicans are saying, and let me get this right, is that they don't care about what gets negotiated. They're against it no matter what. And not because they don't like what's in the bill. They're against it because Donald Trump, who they're all afraid of, told them they have to be against it. Trump wants to demagogue the border, to use it as a campaign issue, and to scare people by demonizing immigrants and peddling fear and hate. So our side will keep an open mind until these negotiations wrap up, but please spare us the outrage and indignation. The truth is out there for everybody to see. Republicans want inaction at the border because they want to make this a campaign issue for Trump. Trump, the guy who said he would build a wall and Mexico would pay for it, remember that guy? Remember that? Never even finished his stupid wall, by the way, and instead it was the American taxpayer who paid for what little of it was built. This is why people hate Washington. It's all theatrics from my friends on the other side. It's all for show, all so they can go on Fox News and blame President Biden for the border problems that they refuse to fix. Republicans wanted to cut customs and border protection personnel. They rejected President Biden's request for $106 billion for border security, and then they voted against funding for border security. And now they're against a border security deal before they even know what's in it. A deal, by the way, that conservative Republican senators say would be the toughest, strongest border security bill in a generation. Unless, I mean, maybe did I miss something? Is Tom Tillis a liberal Democrat now? Senator Tillis, who has been working on this deal, called out House Republicans. He said, and I quote, "Don't pretend that this policy isn't strong. If you want to admit you're afraid to tell Trump the truth, that's fine. But for you to take a look at this framework and say it's a half measure, you're not paying attention or you're not telling the truth," end quote. And what about Senator Langford? Is he a Democrat now? He said just yesterday on Face the Nation that you all, meaning House Republicans, and I quote, "actually don't want to change in law because it's a presidential election year," end quote. Since you're all so scared of Trump, let me quote the leader of our party, President Joe Biden, quote, "What's been negotiated would, if passed into law, be the toughest and fairest set of reforms to secure the border we've ever had in our country. It would give me, as president, a new emergency authority to shut down the border when it becomes overwhelmed. And if given that authority, I would use it the day I signed the bill into law," end quote. Now, who knows how these negotiations go? I'm keeping an open mind. But for Republicans to claim that they care so much about the border, to talk about how they want immediate action, and then to reject a border security deal before it's even been released, is really kind of cynical. It's one of the most cynical things I think I've seen in all my time here. And then there's even a question of whether these useless messaging bills that are before us today actually make it to the floor. The far right voted down a rule a couple of weeks ago in retaliation for the funding deal that Speaker Johnson struck with the Democrats. That's the fifth rule this Congress that's gone down. Republicans used to waste time passing bills that had no chance in the Senate. Now they waste time trying to pass bills that they can't even pass in the House. So we don't pass laws up here anymore. We barely even pass rules. So maybe my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, maybe Mr. Roy or Mr. Norman, will tell us how they plan to vote on the rule, because if they're going to vote against the rule again, let's just save ourselves the time and not even bother with the rest of this hearing. And at the end of the day, the truth is that Republicans don't want to fix the border. House Democrats, Senate Democrats, President Biden, and now with the cooperation of Senate Republicans, you know, we have been ready and we've been willing to work together in a bipartisan way to solve this country's problems. Republicans apparently care more about making Trump happy than border security. What a shame. I yield back my time.
The chair thanks the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the report. I would like to welcome our first panel, Representative Tom McClintock and Ranking Member Gerald Nadler from the Committee on the Judiciary. Representative McClintock, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. The Judiciary Committee has reported favorably on 4 bills to strengthen our ability to keep bad actor foreign nationals out of the United States and help ensure that if already in the country, those bad actors can be quickly removed. Thanks to President Biden and his open border policies, the entire U.S. immigration system is in chaos, starting with the southwest border. When Mr. Trump left office, illegal immigration had slowed to a trickle. The Remain in Mexico policy had all but stopped phony asylum claims. The border wall was nearing completion, and we were actually enforcing court-ordered deportations. On his first day in office, Mr. Biden reversed these policies and initiated the largest illegal mass migration in recorded history. This policy is deliberate and it's devastating. It's broken the social safety net for Americans. It's packed classrooms with non-English speaking students. It's closed entire high schools to house them. It's flooded emergency rooms with illegals demanding basic care. It's flooded the country with deadly fentanyl. It's locked working families into perpetual wage stagnation and is increasingly consumed the attention of law enforcement. These four bills deal with just a few of the dangers that this administration has unleashed by its reckless abandonment of our borders. High-speed chases that are killing Americans, identity theft of American Social Security accounts, drunk driving deaths caused by illegals, and the entry of terrorists into our country. Now let's start with H.R. 5585. That's the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act. Mr. Chairman, as you pointed out, Agent Gonzalez was killed in Mission, Texas on December 7, 2022, while he was pursuing a group of illegal aliens in a high-speed chase. This is becoming an increasing occurrence in our border towns. This bill would make it a federal crime for human smugglers and others to evade Border Patrol agents or law enforcement entities actively assisting those agents within 100 miles of the border and make such offenders inadmissible to and removable from our country if they're foreign nationals. H.R. 6678 makes aliens inadmissible to and removable from our country for committing Social Security or identity fraud. In 2017, now that's before the Democrats opened our borders and introduced the largest illegal mass migration in history, there were 1.2 million cases in which illegal aliens had used Social Security numbers that either belonged to somebody else or were simply fabricated. The Trump administration tried to address this by alerting employers to the suspicious use of Social Security numbers, but Biden ended this program. And since the number of illegals has expanded exponentially since then, it's likely that so too has the fraud. The harm to Americans whose ID is stolen can be devastating, destroying their credit, often taking years of frustration to correct. Yet there's no guarantee that these identity thieves will be removed from our country. H.R. 6678 changes that. H.R. 6679 ensures that aliens who are members of Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as well as those aliens who participated in the horrific and barbaric attacks on Israeli families beginning on October 7th, 2023, are to be quickly removed from our country, and it bars them from any relief whenever and wherever they are encountered. Now, this won't stop the influx of terrorists into this country. Only an administration committed to securing our border and protecting Americans can do that. But this bill does send an important message around the world. If you associate with Hamas, you will get no comfort or quarter here. You are persona non grata, as you should be in any corner of the world that values peace, justice, and human dignity. Finally, H.R. 6976, the Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act, closes a long-standing loophole in U.S. immigration law that has resulted in aliens who drive under the influence of alcohol or drugs not being subject to immigration consequences. Currently, there's no ground of admissibility or ground of removability explicitly related to DUIs. This bill changes that. Now, obviously, not all drunk driving deaths and injuries are committed by aliens, but too many are. For example, just last month, an illegal alien drunk driver was charged with killing a 46-year-old mother and her 16-year-old son. He had multiple previous DUI offenses, and just days before the crash, had been sentenced to probation for one of those prior offenses. Why shouldn't we make it easier to remove such people from our country more quickly? Mr. Chairman, the mass illegal migration unleashed by this administration obviously can't be fixed by bills that won't be signed, laws that won't be enforced, funds that will be used to release illegal aliens but not expel them, or by replacing one leftist official with another. And this is where I may partially agree with the ranking member. It can only be fixed by voters replacing this administration with one dedicated to enforcing our laws, securing our borders, and defending our country. But in the meantime, the House can lay the groundwork for a new administration, and these bills are a small step in that direction. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Unfortunately, it appears my Republican colleagues are out of ideas. 2 weeks ago, I was here for a pointless, non-binding resolution that did nothing to improve the situation at the border. This week, it is for multiple bills that are largely duplicative of current law and amount to little more than desperate attempts to score political points by scapegoating and fear-mongering about immigrants. Nor do these bills have much connection with the situation at the border. None of these bills stand any chance of becoming law, nor would they improve our immigration system or make Americans safer. It is long past time for House Republicans to engage in bipartisan discussions to address our broken immigration system. But as Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell laid bare just last week, too many Republicans, led by Donald Trump, want the issue of immigration more than they want to find meaningful solutions. That is the context in which we find ourselves in the Rules Committee today. But while I'm here, let's go through each of these bills. I'll start with H.R. 5585, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act. This legislation makes it a crime to flee Border Patrol while operating a vehicle and includes an unnecessary mandatory minimum sentence that runs counter to the bipartisan progress that we have made on criminal justice reform in recent years. While this conduct is largely covered by another criminal statute, which makes it a crime to evade a Border Patrol checkpoint, this legislation also adds significant immigration consequences. Under this bill, the crime of fleeing Border Patrol becomes an inadmissibility and deportability offense. But just as the new crimes in this bill are largely covered by current law, evading or fleeing law enforcement is already an inadmissibility and deportability offense. Where this bill makes a significant change is by not requiring that an individual be convicted of the crime to render them deportable. Doesn't have to be convicted of the crime. While there are exceptions, the majority of the deportability grounds in current law require a conviction. That is because we are dealing with those who are already here and came here lawfully and have often lived in the United States for a long time. We're not talking about illegal immigrants. Remember that someone who is here unlawfully is already removable. Therefore, we are talking about lawful permanent residents, people who have put down roots in our communities, many of whom have U.S. citizens, spouses, and children, and who have truly established themselves here in the United States. By not requiring a conviction before making someone deportable, this bill flies in the face of due process. We have the same issue when it comes to H.R. 6678, the Consequences for Social Security Fraud Act. Convictions for Social Security fraud are largely captured by our current laws. Fraud-related crimes are considered crimes involving moral turpitude, commonly called a CMT. And convictions involving falsely making, forging, counterfeiting, or altering a document that can be used as evidence of authorized stay or employment in the United States is specifically defined as an aggravated felony. A conviction for any of these already makes someone deportable. Unfortunately, the majority once again decides not to require a conviction for people to be deported, and once again places their desire to attack and demonize immigrants before any concern for due process. Then we have H.R. 6976, the Protect Communities from DUIs Act. At least for this bill, the majority requires a conviction to deport a green card holder. Driving under the influence, or DUI, is, of course, a serious issue. No one wants to see individuals who are true threats to public safety eligible for immigration benefits. However, serious DUI convictions already make an individual inadmissible and deportable under current law. DUI, where the maximum possible penalty is a year or more, and where there is serious bodily harm, hit and runs, aggravated DUI, driving with knowledge of an invalid, suspended, or revoked license, are already CIMTs. But this bill goes much further. It does not take into account that DUI statutes across our country are broad and varied. Some states allow DUI prosecutions of individuals who are asleep, inebriated in their car, even if their car was parked in their own driveway. And this is not hypothetical. We know this to be the case because people have actually been prosecuted and convicted for DUI for these minor infractions. This issue and other problems with these bills could have been addressed by amendments that Democrats offered during our markup, but each was rejected on a party line vote. The last bill, H.R. 6679, the No Immigration Benefits for Hamas Terrorist Acts, is very personal to me. On October 7th, Hamas committed a horrific assault on innocent civilians in Israel, murdering 1,200 people, including 32 Americans, killing the most Jewish people in a single day since the Holocaust. Even today, over 110 days later, Hamas continues to hold innocent men, women, and children in captivity. Not a day goes by that I don't think of the hostages and the horrors they continue to endure. Too many lives have been shattered by this attack and the war that followed on both sides of the conflict. This bill has a goal that I strongly support: to ensure that no one involved with the planning or commission of the October 7th attacks can enter the United States or receive any immigration benefit. It is not clear what its purpose is, however, since such individuals are already barred from entry and cannot receive any immigration status. Hamas has been listed as a terrorist organization by the State Department since 1997, and our immigration laws are very broad, saying that the United States merely needs, quote, reason to believe, close quote, that any non-citizen has engaged in terrorist activity, provided material support to terrorists, or is a member or representative of a terrorist organization or a group that endorses or espouses terrorist activity to be inadmissible to the country. The breadth of this provision is so extensive, it has been used to bar someone from accessing asylum who was forced to cook and clean for a guerrilla group. As such, this bill is largely redundant to current law. Even the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office determined it would have little to no impact because of the breadth of existing law. We asked the majority to work with us to ensure that this legislation had no unintended consequences, and to format this legislation, as we normally do, as visa sanctions legislation. But unfortunately, this request was ignored. For decades, the Judiciary Committee and the Congress have used visa sanctions to target specific individuals engaged in specific events. However, the majority here has chosen a different path and directly amends the Immigration and Nationality Act, something we did not even do after September 11th when we wanted to target al-Qaeda. I will still support this bill, but I worry that the majority's inability to work with us will doom its chances to become law, making it another meaningless vote. I'm disappointed that they would take this important issue and turn it into a partisan political football. Unfortunately, that seems to be the standard operating procedure under this Republican majority. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to the committee's questions.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks. Gentlemen, let me begin with a few questions to you, Mr. McClintock. I was with that group that Speaker Johnson took down to Eagle Pass a few weeks ago, and I think you were on that trip as well, were you not?
I was.
And it was striking how you saw on the news from the week before, thousands of people queued up in that field. They still had the orange fencing up. Thousands of people queued up in that field, and yet when we arrived, there were zero.
Well, not exactly zero. There
Well,
were
but there were-
still groups crossing
Sure.
and taunting the Border Patrol as they crossed. That's what I found the most infuriating.
It was
They're basically
infuriating.
thumbing their noses at us.
However, it can be, what is also infuriating is to recognize that it can be stopped. It can be controlled. It can be halted. Now, I don't know whether that was Joe Biden or the cartels that decided it would be better to keep throngs of people away from Eagle Pass, Texas that day while members of Congress showed up. But we saw it with our own eyes. It can happen. You're right about the stragglers that came across the river, and it was doubly infuriating where they were simply picked up by Customs and Border Protection and taken down to a processing site to be shipped somewhere in the country. But there we're talking about 12 to 25 people, nowhere near the thousands that were on the news the week before. So it just begs the question. We know they can control it. The president says, oh, if we sign this bill, I'll enforce it immediately. He could enforce it today. The president has the power today to fix this problem, and he chooses not to. Is that not correct?
Oh, absolutely. Under the Immigration Naturalization Act, he has complete authority to shut down the border completely, to refuse entry of anyone if he believes it's in the national interest. He refuses to do so. We saw under the Trump administration the effect of the Remain in Mexico policy that slowed phony asylum claims to a trickle. The Border Patrol saying that the completion of the border wall absolutely essential as a force multiplier for them to do their jobs. And of course, enforcing court-ordered deportations ought to be a no-brainer. The president on his first day in office ordered ICE not to enforce those laws. There are currently 1.3 million court-ordered deportations. These are people who have gone through the process, have received a final order of deportation, and those orders are simply being ignored. But you know who has complete control of the border? The cartels. As we also heard at Eagle Pass, the cartels just in the Del Rio sector alone are making $32 million a week trafficking illegal immigrants into the country. That's over $1.5 billion a year to the cartels just in that one sector, aided and abetted entirely by this administration's policies. The Border Patrol was very, very clear on this point. No one crosses the border without paying the cartels. It's only when they reach our side of the border that there's no control. So the cartels are making over $1 billion a year controlling the border, and this administration is spending billions of dollars a year with it wide open, and those billions of dollars are going to traffic millions of illegal immigrants into the country to the detriment of the people of this nation.
Yeah, I've heard it said before that no one goes into the river without permission from the cartels and probably some sort of monetary exchange
Right, and
prior.
if I could add just one other thing in response to the ranking member, he should know, it's not just conviction. He's saying, well, you don't have to be convicted. That's true. Under this bill, you don't have to be convicted after years and years of cases. But if you're not convicted, you have to have confessed to that crime. This doesn't simply deport someone based upon somebody's suspicion or accusation. Either they're convicted of it or they have to admit to it. Those are the criteria under which these bills operate. So to suggest that somehow this is an arbitrary expulsion is simply false.
So let me ask you another question. On the issue of there is already existing law to cover each of these eventualities, with your work on the committee, what is your response to that?
Well, again, the experience has been that under current law, it can take years and years and years to expel somebody who's admitted to the crime, but is now contesting it in court. This ends that farce and assures that these people can be expelled if they've admitted to their crime. Get them out of the country.
You know, we've been at this for a long time. And one of the questions that's repeatedly come up, and it's never answered by the other side, is, well, the United States is a pretty generous country. We accept 1.1, 1.2 million people a year into this country legally, probably more than any other country on the face of the earth. So with that background, with that backdrop, what is the number that people want to be able to come in without the benefit of permission and then subsequently be legalized, receive amnesty?
Right.
And no one will ever tell you what that number is.
Well, actually, Gallup warned us that according to their polling, 42 million people living in Latin America and the Caribbean alone, forget about the rest of the world, intend to come here now that they can. We've already seen this administration deliberately release 3.3 million illegal immigrants into this country in defiance of our laws. That's a population the size of the entire state of Iowa. And while the Border Patrol has been overwhelmed, taking names and changing diapers, another 1.7 million known gotaways. These are people that we either watched or tracked enter our country but couldn't stop. have also entered the country. That is an additional illegal population the size of the state of West Virginia. That under this administration. And I'm afraid that the effect, not just on our social services, but on our national security is grave.
Well, I think President Biden has set the parameter now with 5,000 a day that calculates out to almost 2 million people a year, figuring that there's going to be more than 5,000 a day that come across before they call a halt to it.
Well, they'll simply stage them so that it will be a steady 5,000 a day. And this is considered an improvement to what the administration is now doing.
And I guess that's where I'm having difficulty. If you can do that at 5,000 a day, why not at 500 or 50?
Well, Governor
or
DeSantis
5?
said the threshold should be zero. There should be zero illegal immigrants admitted into this country. And let's not confuse the two, as the ranking member just did, by saying that we're fear-mongering and scapegoating immigrants. There is a distinct difference between a legal immigrant who has come to our country out of a love of our nation, who wants their children to become Americans, who have done everything our country's asked them to do, who have waited patiently and have obeyed all of our laws, and now have watched 5 million illegal immigrants cut in line in front of them. The people I find who are the angriest about illegal immigration are the legal immigrants. And to conflate the two, to compare that legal immigrant who has come here obeying our laws with the illegal immigrant who has come here thumbing his nose at our laws and our nation's sovereignty is an insult to every one of those legal immigrants who are the backbone of our country's history.
That's absolutely correct. I'm going to yield to the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me just state for the record, today there were approximately 38,000 people in immigration detention, which is 4,000 more than what DHS is funded for, and roughly what the Trump administration averaged in fiscal year 2018. The Biden administration has also significantly increased removals, quite frankly, in ways that many in my caucus worry violates due process. Since the end of Title 42 last year, the Biden administration has removed or returned to Mexico close to 500,000 individuals, including over 78,000 individual members of family units, including children. The total is nearly equivalent to the number of people removed in all of the fiscal year 2019 under the Trump administration. So I don't believe that that's an open border. But let me just say, Mr. McClintock, I do agree with you on one thing, and that is we need somebody to lead our country who follows the law. Our previous president, just to remind everybody, has 4 indictments with 91 charges, all of them felonies, all of them felonies. He's been indicted more times than he's been elected. And just recently, he was ordered by a jury of his peers to pay $85 million for defaming a woman who he sexually assaulted. So when we talk about following the laws, let us hope that somebody who has such disregard for the law and such disregard for our Constitution never gets anywhere near the White House. And while we're on the subject of Donald Trump, Mr. McClintock, he said, and this will give you an opportunity to distance yourself from or condemn the statement, he said, and I quote, immigrants, he didn't distinguish between legal immigrants or undocumented immigrants, he said immigrants poison the blood of our country. Would you agree that that's an offensive thing for?
If that's what he actually
That's what he
said in
said.
the context that he said
He
it.
did.
But I
And you
found
know who
over
said
the
that?
years, I found over the years
And Hitler
that how
said,
he's,
that's a quote from Adolf Hitler as
what
well.
I found over the years is what he says and what he is quoted as saying are two very different things. So
okay,
I'd be
all right,
very
yeah.
skeptical.
Tape, for
I
Christ's
mean, it's
sake.
on, I mean, it's like, the lang, I
take,
get
for
I get the fact that everybody's on the Republican side's afraid of him, but I mean, the lengths that
I'm
people
not
go,
afraid of him. I'm
the lengths that people go to defend the indefensible. But let me go into a different subject here. I've served on this committee for a long time. Maybe not best to say exactly how long, but it's been a long time. But the Rules Committee used to be a place where we showed up to really get things done, where we would discuss the big pressing issues facing our country, where we would debate how each side thought these problems should be solved, and where we'd pass consequential legislation to improve the lives of Americans. That's why it has been difficult to watch this committee turn into a venue solely for what members, even members of the majority, call, and I quote, messaging bills that don't matter. Mr. McClintock, do you know how many bills the Judiciary Committee has testified on up here since Republicans took control of Congress last year that have actually become law?
Well, if we had a president who would sign them and a Senate that would pass them, we'd have quite a few, including the toughest immigration bill in 100 years.
Let me answer. It's zero. Zero is the answer.
Right. Well, that's
Not
my
a single
point.
judiciary bill that has come before the Rules Committee has become law, which is absurd because I feel like the Judiciary Committee is before us every week. And those on the other side of the dais may, are probably about to say, well, I'm cherry-picking data, and the Judiciary Committee is an outlier. But do you know, but do you all know when the last time this committee met on a bill that got signed into law? I'll tell you, it was 8 months ago when we met on the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and even that moved forward because Democrats were the adults in the room and actually voted for the rule to avoid a debt ceiling disaster. That's 8 months, more than half of our time this Congress wasted on, and I quote, messaging bills that don't matter. And at this point, I'm not sure if that's a bug or a feature of this for this Republican majority. And I heard you just say, well, that's if we had the president sign everything we passed here, that it would be different. Well, I would say to my Republican friends, you're not dictators yet, okay? And the deal is, the Congress, the last time I checked, is Republicans narrowly control the House, the Democrats narrowly control the Senate, and we have a Democratic president. So if we are interested in legislating and getting things done, there is a give and take. It's not my way or the highway. And as I said in my opening remark, what really concerns me, and again, I have lots of concerns about what the Senate is negotiating on immigration right now and on border security, and my concerns are different from yours, but to hear the former President of the United States and to hear members in this House say, we're dismissing whatever they do out of line. We will not even have a debate. They will have no vote on any of this stuff because, we don't want to do anything. We want to basically preserve this issue for an election matter. Mr. Nadler, are any of the bills that we are talking about today, will any of these bills directly help solve the problems that we currently have at the southern border?
No, they certainly are not, will not. They're not addressed to the problems of the southern border. Let me comment, by the way, on two things.
Okay.
Number one, a lot of falsehoods have been heard around this table today. Under President Trump, hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants were released into the country with a court date years down the road every single year. This was not a problem created by President Biden. Every single year under Trump, hundreds of thousands of people were released into the country with a court date several years later. President Biden has asked, and I've discussed this at this committee previously, has asked for appropriations to increase the number of Border Patrol, to increase the number of asylum judges and immigration judges, so that people can get their asylum claims adjudicated in weeks, not in years. And those entitled to asylum can work, and those not entitled to asylum can be speedily deported. That's President Biden's proposal. $14 billion would accomplish that. This Congress, the Republicans, will not do that. So when they talk about people released into the country for years, A, they're not talking about a new problem, what's happened under Trump, and B, they're talking about a problem that they are stopping from being solved. Let me say one other thing. I've discussed the objections to these bills, the specific objections to these specific bills. Mr. McClintock made one point, which I must disagree with. He said these bills, or several of them, by not requiring convictions, just admissions, will hasten deportations. Yes, they will hasten deportations. But we have a respect for due process in this country. The Miranda decision, going back all the way to 1961, says that you have due process, that something you admit to, just because you admitted it, is not necessarily true, depending how that admission was elicited. And that's why Miranda warnings are given to people. Nothing like that is here. And so what these bills provide for is a total negation of due process and a total negation of justice. And that's why, or one of the reasons why, they should be rejected.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I'll just close with this. I think, you know, I mean, we do these, we routinely do these bills in the Rules Committee, bring bills to the floor that, again, are mostly messaging bills, which I think everybody's getting a little bit tired of. And every time there's an opportunity to actually do something substantive, my Republican friends walk away. And you know, which, and Donald Trump said it out loud, said the part that we've all suspected for a long time, but he said out loud, basically, don't do anything. Don't do anything. Leave me this issue. Let me be able to demagogue on this issue for the remaining of this campaign season, and it maybe, you know, a guy with 4 indictments and 91 felony charges might be able to sneak by and become president again, and, you know, and I'll do all the things that I didn't do when I was president. And so he said out loud the part that I think we all have known, and that is, you guys don't want to do anything. And I think I'm tired of it. The American people are tired of it. You know, and frankly, it's just sad. And I hope, you know, I'm hoping we're to get to a point when we're serious, not just about this issue, but about a whole bunch of other issues that, quite frankly, have been neglected by this Republican majority that, again, has the worst record of accomplishment of any Congress in history. So anyway, I thank you both. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I think we've somehow strayed from from what's really going on in these bills. And so, Chairman McClintock, I just was wondering if you could maybe just answer a series of questions. Is it lawful for a U.S. citizen to evade the pursuit of law enforcement?
No.
Is there penalty for a U.S. citizen who
Yes.
evades? Is it lawful for a U.S. citizen to drive under the influence of alcohol?
No,
And are there penalties?
of course.
What about identity fraud
Same,
and penalties?
same.
And I think that makes my point that I am just, you know, I fail to see what my colleagues who are raising concerns with these bills, at a minimum, it's equally applying the laws to aliens.
With this difference, and I think the ranking member would hasten to point this out. Under these bills, with respect to illegal immigrants, the deportation, the inadmissibility can be triggered simply by their admitting to the crime. Now, this is not unprecedented, not by a long shot. There are a large series of offenses where this is already applicable to illegal immigrants. For example, an alien can be removed for overstaying his visa, violating his non-immigrant status or condition of entry, smuggling aliens, committing marriage fraud, being a drug user or a drug addict, falsely claiming U.S. citizenship, or engaging in espionage. None of those requires a conviction if there is an admission. And the admission terms are very strict. For 80 years, the Board of Immigration Appeals has provided protections for aliens whose removability and admissibility is based on such an admission. Under the precedent, to be considered an admission, the alien's admission must be explicit, unequivocal, and unqualified. The Department of Homeland Security then bears the burden to show by clear and convincing evidence that the statement meets that requirement for removability purposes. And even then, the immigration judge would have to find that this admission fits within the relevant statutes, and the admission is based on reasonable, substantial, and probative evidence. So it's a very high standard, but it's one that is currently lacking in the law and would expedite the removal of those who meet that criteria without going through many, many years of legal process. The irony is this. The Democrats want us to take the word of illegal aliens when they approach a Border Patrol officer as to their name, their identity, their country of origin. We're supposed to take the word for all of that. But the Democrats won't take their word when they admit that they've committed these crimes in the United States. Go figure.
I appreciate that clarification, and these just make sense to me. I mean, these are bills that are common sense bills, and so I appreciate that. Yeah, and I appreciate that you brought them forward, because I'm assuming that the American public already thinks this is happening, and the fact that it's not is a problem. And so I appreciate that you brought these forward. Did you have something else to add?
I was just to say they're common sense unless you are deliberately attempting to admit millions of illegal immigrants into the country, and that appears to be the policy. And I do agree with Mr. McGovern. We are at a loggerheads as a government. Ultimately, this is not going to be fixed with laws that won't be signed and won't be enforced if they are signed. It's going to be fixed by the American people deciding whether they want to continue down this path. This ultimately is in their hands.
I appreciate that. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Chair, thanks, gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for questions.
Thank you, and I'd first yield to Mr.
Well,
McGovern.
I'm just a little confused by that last statement. You say this is not going to be fixed with laws. What the hell are we doing here then?
We are laying the foundation for an administration that will enforce these laws and
The
strengthening
guy
their
who's
hand
been indicted
and
by-
strengthening their
who's been
hand to do
indicted 4
so.
times on 91 felony counts?
I can't foresee the future, but I can
I
tell
mean,
you this.
the guy who just has been forced to pay $85 million for defaming a woman he sexually abused. I mean, that's who you. I mean, come on. I mean, this is. Then wait till then go out and campaign for this guy, and maybe he wins, and then But if laws aren't going to make any difference, why are we here?
Whoever the Republican and Democratic nominees are, this is going to be the question that the American people are going to have to settle at the ballot box.
I just when you say
We
the
need a
laws don't
Senate-
matter here, then we're here
we need
doing
a
this.
Senate that is
We're
just as
wasting our time,
devoted-
but that's what you think.
We need a Senate that is just as devoted to enforcing our immigration laws as the previous president was, as this House is, and we need a president with the resolve to secure our borders and defend our country, which is something
Well, if
we
this is an
presently
important, if
lack.
this is an important issue that we need to act now, then I'm just curious how my friends can defend the former president who was saying, do nothing, because we need a campaign issue.
We invite
But,
you,
Mr. Nadler,
we
you
invite
had
you to join us.
I want to, first of all, a couple of things. First of all, these bills deal with, for the most part, with legal immigrants, not illegal immigrants. Let's get that straight. For the most part, they deal with legal immigrants. Second of all, I was not surprised. I was pleased at his honesty that Mr. McClintock a moment ago said that the whole purpose of these bills is his campaign rhetoric.
I didn't say that.
Oh, yes, you did. You said that we're here to present things to the American public, not to pass laws. I'd also point out,
With all respect,
I'd also
I
point
said
out-
we
I
were laying
have
the
a deal.
groundwork
I'd
for an
also-
administration that will actually enforce the laws.
okay, which is another way of saying it's a campaign issue. To lay the groundwork for an administration that will actually enforce the laws, to lay the groundwork for another administration, which is to say these bills are intended solely to be a campaign issue. I'd also point out, Mr. Chairman, or ranking member,
I like the first one better.
it'll be, the former president, Trump, who has said we shouldn't pass any legislation, no matter what it says, on immigration, so that you can have an issue, has been indicted on 91 counts, but he's been convicted of what the judge called rape. He is a convicted rapist. And that is hard to bear for someone who wants to be the next president of the United States.
Well, I appreciate that, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Thank you. I am disappointed, but not really surprised, that House Republicans have chosen to waste more time this week with a package of messaging bills that do pretty much nothing to change the law or the status quo with respect to immigration at our southern border. Despite all their bluster and dramatic visits to the Rio Grande, they've shown time and time again that they're not really interested in fixing problems for the American people. They only want to campaign on them. House Republicans have rejected, as Mr. Nadler said, the president's request for supplemental border security funding. House Republicans have rejected serious negotiations and common sense policy solutions to address responsible and effective border management and immigration courts, the root causes of migration, and functioning legal pathways to citizenship. And now, as House Republicans waste time by bringing up these redundant messaging bills, they're rejecting a bipartisan bipartisan immigration bill that Senate Democrats and Republicans and the Biden administration have worked on for months. They're refusing to even consider that bipartisan bill because their party leader, Donald Trump, told them that he wants to campaign on the issue, and that fixing some of the problems at the border would be a win for President Biden and therefore bad for the Trump campaign. They said the bipartisan bill is dead on arrival in the House before they even saw the terms of it. And therein lies the problem, doesn't it? Our constituents want us to work together to get wins for the American people. But when one party would rather campaign and complain about problems than solve them, the American people lose. We know the issues at the border require serious solutions, and the bills that House Republicans have brought before us today are not serious, and in fact, add nothing new in terms of solutions at the border. Mr. Nadler, would you agree that by and large, these bills duplicate existing law regarding deportation and who should be excluded?
They do indeed duplicate, as I said in my opening statement. By and large, they duplicate existing law. They worsen due process on some things, but by and large, they completely duplicate existing law.
So am I correct that non-citizens can already be deported if they are convicted of fleeing Border Patrol or committing Social Security fraud?
Absolutely.
And am I also correct that members of Hamas, which the U.S. has rightly already declared a foreign terrorist organization, are already ineligible for admission to the United States?
Yes.
So while these bills provide an opportunity for our colleagues to thump their chests and pretend they're doing something to address border security, they don't really change the status quo at the border at all, do they?
They don't change the status quo at the border at all. They do with respect to some legal immigrants, take away due process rights if they're accused of things like drunk driving or other things. And as I said, because of the laws of various states, someone who is asleep, inebriated in his own car, in his own driveway, under this bill would be deportable.
Okay, so there are actual pre-existing instances that are causing the objections to these bills
Yes.
that we have. Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I just find it interesting on this DUI issue. We had this debate about whether a car should be able to disable somebody who's driving, whether the dashboard could judge whether somebody should be convicted of a DUI and therefore be stopped by the side of the road. And I offered an amendment a few weeks ago. Only 2 Democrats voted for that, and for due process, if you will, of not disabling somebody's vehicle just because the electronics think the person may be inebriated. But with that said, Mr. McClintock, is there anything said here recently that you think needs to be clarified or elaborated on, or maybe
I think much has been,
countermanded?
but the ranking member just made the point that this is duplicative of existing laws, that people who are convicted of drunk driving are already deportable. That part is true, but again, this also would add an admission of that. But more to the point, in many cases, even when convicted, they're not inadmissible and not deportable. In fact, at least the U.S. Courts of Appeal for the 7th Circuit, 9th Circuit, 11th Circuit, and potentially in the 4th and 10th Circuits have said that Social Security fraud offenses, for example, do not carry immigration consequences. In one case, the Ninth Circuit determined an illegal aliens fraud conviction did not carry immigration consequences because it was not a crime involving moral turpitude. This sets this right, clarifies it. If you steal an American Social Security number, we are going to show you the door.
Thank you very much. So they're not duplicative or redundant. There may be some things that are clarified by these.
Well, and again, these are the same criteria that already exist for a wide range of immigration violations, which I just read to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. McClintock. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, Chair. Thanks, the gentleman. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I share the same frustration as my colleagues up here. It's like, here we go again. A week of Republican futility. This Congress, as we say over and over again, is the least productive Congress since the Depression, and given some of the laws that they keep putting before us, thank heaven for that. And why? Because what we keep seeing in this Rules Committee and on the floor of the House is what I'm trying to figure out, what is it? And it is that there is a constant attempt to foment anger, division, acrimony. They have division, but no vision. Because if they had vision, they'd actually want to try to solve the problems that we have. We don't have an open border. Our ranking member just talked about the numbers, the thousands and thousands and tens of thousands that are incarcerated, that are deported on a regular basis. And Mr. McClintock, in your presentations, you've talked about cartels. These bills have nothing to do with the cartels, but I would assume you would be, given your concern about this, in favor of vital supplemental requests, which we're not going to even hear on the floor, I would imagine. But I'm assuming you would be in favor of 1,000 additional CBP field officers to help staff our ports of entry.
You know,
I would assume that you'd be in favor of $23.2 million for the DEA so we can do more around fentanyl tracing and enforcement. Another $1.4 billion for our shelter and services program so we could address these things. These are things I think actually make a difference. But none of the bills we're seeing here today actually do this. Instead, as we're hearing, again, there is an effort to actually address the border crisis. I'm not sure I'm in favor of it because we haven't actually seen what it looks like. But we've already seen on the House side that it's being killed. Why? Because Trump has said, kill it. It's better for me politically if you kill this deal, and I will happily take the blame for it. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record an article titled GOP Senator, it is, open quote, immoral, close quote, to kill the border deal to help Trump.
Objection so ordered.
You know, it is striking what's in this. Senator Tom Tillis, who we pointed out is Republican, says, it is immoral for me to think you look the other way because you think this is a linchpin for President Trump to win. Strong words. Senator Mitt Romney called the effort to kill the bill, open quote, appalling. He noted that there is an issue at the southern border and needs to be fixed. We had Senator Todd Young calling the efforts to disrupt the negotiations as tragic. Senator Tillis again saying it would take courage for members to actually move ahead and get this done. Courage. Courage. What we keep hearing in this Rules Committee and in this Republican-controlled House is outrage. Talk about things that then don't get fixed by the bills before us, but sadly not courage. What I think it would take courage to do is if in these bills we actually did something that made a difference. I see Representative Garcia, who is going to testify about the need to have an amendment to these bills so we could have the Dream and Promise Act. That would take courage to actually do something that Americans want us to do, which is make sure that deferred action for children actually happens so that we could reap the economic benefits that these children are providing to our country, recognizing the economic benefits that dreamers bring to us, which would be actually courage to do something right and do something that's consistent with what American people need and is so needed by our economy and is, instead of being immoral, the morally right thing to do. I don't know, Ranking Member, if you have any further thoughts about this or wanted to answer any of the other issues that have been raised.
No, I think we've gone through much of it. We're dealing with messaging bills, with hypocrisy, with a political party that doesn't want to solve the problem because it wants the problem for the general election, although various Republican senators, that's not a fair description of them, but it's certainly a fair description of our former president and apparently of the House Republicans. There's not much else that can be said. The specifics of these bills I've already criticized, but the specifics are almost unimportant because we know these bills are going nowhere and are intended to go nowhere.
But more importantly, they actually don't fix the problem that the larger issues that have been raised today in bold headlines like this is happening, but none of these bills actually do that. And so that's the thing, is that we need to have the kind of courage to recognize that we need to fix the system, to recognize also the economic benefits that would come to us if we fix the system. We need to do, as my colleague mentioned, go in and invest in the countries where we're sending migrants up here, because until we do that, we have to stop the flow. We need to help people stay where they would prefer to stay, which is in their home country. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair thanks the gentlelady. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Representative McClintock, you visited our southern border and you've seen firsthand the systematic way that the cartels have managed the trafficking of illegal aliens across our border. Is there a feeling among those crossing our borders illegally that there is little standing in their way to prevent any of them from breaking our laws?
Well, of course not. All they need to do is flag down a Border Patrol officer, and they are guaranteed admittance into the country, free snacks, free food, free medical care, a ticket anywhere in the country that they want to go. Within 6 months, they're guaranteed a work permit, and they know that when their phony asylum claim is heard many, many years in the future, if they happen to show up for it and it's rejected, and they're ordered deported, that deportation order will not be enforced under this administration. You know, I was listening to Ms. Leisure-Fernandez ask, well, we should be putting more and more money as the president requests into it. You know, we were down at the Yuma border last year and met with a large group of Border Patrol officers. You know what they told us? For God's sake, don't send more money to this administration because they will simply use it to process people into the country even faster. That's a deliberate policy of this administration, and that's a question, as I said earlier, that can only be answered by the American people. Now, the Democrats keep criticizing this is the least productive session. We just talk and talk and talk about this crisis. We waste time talking about this crisis. We pass bills out of the House, well-structured, well-considered bills that will strengthen the hand of a president who wishes to enforce the laws, obviously not this one, but then fall short in the Senate. So why do we even try? Now, I want you to contrast that to the last 2 years that the Democrats controlled this House, and this mass migration, this mass illegal migration was unleashed by their policies. I was ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee then. Not a single hearing on the crisis, not a single hearing on the tragedy of the border. We had lots of hearings on how to admit more people into the country. Not a single hearing, not a word from the Democrats to defend our country's borders as they unleash this onslaught against the people of our nation. And ultimately, the people of our nation are going to have to respond.
Representative McClintock, is there any concern among those that are crossing illegally that their asylum case might be thrown out or they'll be deported back to their country of origin?
Well, again, they know that the odds are very much in favor that they will be able to stay here indefinitely, just as a practical matter. Many of them don't show up for their court dates. In fact, many of them are only given a notice to report rather than a notice to appear, meaning they're released on their own recognizance. They can then, by the way, use these documents, which amount to arrest warrants, for proof of identity on any plane in this country. This is ludicrous, and the American people are starting to awaken to the dangers that it poses. But they know this, and the statistics back them up. And all they await is another amnesty, like the one that is rumored to be considered in the Senate right now, so that will become permanent. Why are they coming? Because they know they'll be admitted and they know they can stay, and that's got to change.
Thank you, Representative McClintock. And finally, our friends across the aisle have spoken at length about how the fraud committed by illegal immigrants using stolen or, quote, shared Social Security numbers has actually had a benefit of funding critical safety net programs like Social Security and Medicare. To quote Representative Pramila Jayapal in 2018, such illicit activity actually, quote, keeps the Social Security system afloat. Is Social Security truly being kept afloat by the theft of Social Security numbers and other personal information by illegal aliens?
Well, no, and more to the point, we just received testimony in the Immigration Subcommittee the week before last that calculates that the average net cost, this is taxes paid minus services demanded, net cost is about $69,000 per immigrant. Now multiply that times the 5 million that have been allowed into this country under this administration's policies. It was just estimated that New York City schools will be paying $1 billion a year just to educate the illegal immigrants who have been brought as minors into this country this past year. Now that's the same as a $1 billion cut to the New York City schools. Now you multiply that by every school in the country, every homeless shelter, every public hospital, and you begin to see the enormous damage that this is doing to our country. And they not only don't care, they're actively promoting it. I have said to folks who've wondered aloud, how could this be happening to our country? Well, the answer is pretty simple. If you voted for the Democrats, this is exactly what you voted for. And if you're surprised by that, you weren't paying any attention, because this is exactly what they promised to do. This is exactly what they have done. And this is exactly what they have defended every single day in this Congress for the last 3 years. And Exhibit A is my good friend from New York.
Well, thank you, and I would like to echo those words to say that I find it insulting to our seniors, and any member of Congress would excuse away blatant crimes against American citizens as somehow helpful to the fiscal future of these programs. I greatly appreciate the work that the House Judiciary Committee has done to bring forward what I believe are targeted fixes to strengthen penalties and deter illegal immigration in those trafficking people across our borders. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank my friend from Texas. I thank the witnesses for being here. I don't want to cover stuff that's already been covered, and I apologize for flight getting here as fast as I could. But I think, Mr. McClintock, a question for you about the 4 bills that are before us. We're dealing here with respect to all 4 of them with individuals who are present in the United States by virtue of having come here without papers. Is that correct? No? What is the classification of people in all 4 bills of the people we're dealing with here?
It applies to both legal and illegal immigrants in many of the bills. And just very simple reasoning, and that is, if you're a guest in this country, we ask that you obey our laws. And if you are not going to obey our laws, we need to show you the door.
We're dealing with non-citizens in all 4?
Correct.
Are we dealing with LPRs in each or all of the 4?
Yeah,
Legal permanent residents?
yeah, I believe so, yes.
But they've been given that status by virtue of our efforts as a country to say you can come here,
They are guests in this country.
provided that you would follow the laws of this country, correct? Are the people that we're dealing with here with respect to all 4 of these bills, however, in significant numbers, we're dealing with a lot of people who are here illegally?
Of course,
Here-
well, especially, for example, at the border chases that are imperiling lives and killing law enforcement officers.
And in most cases, with respect to Social Security fraud,
Oh, yes.
right, by definition.
Yeah, exactly.
So to be clear for the people watching at home, we are moving legislation to try to deal with, in some cases, legal permanent residents or people who are here who have been given legal status by virtue of our desire to be here, but in many cases, dealing with people who are here illegally.
As a practical matter, though, we need to make the distinction of the legal immigrant who's come here and obeyed all of our laws is an exemplary citizen. You'll find that they commit far fewer crimes per capita than American citizens do. These are the folks who have obeyed all of our laws. The Democrats love to compare them and confuse them with illegal immigrants whose very first act entering this country is a misdemeanor, a federal crime. And so it shouldn't surprise us that as a practical matter, these laws will apply overwhelmingly to those illegally in this country who have already demonstrated a disdain and disrespect for our laws.
But to put a finer point on it for the people back home watching this, we're talking about individuals who have been given a status to be in the United States, who have then carried out some action that we believe would require either deportation, inadmissibility, whatever is in the particular statute that we're proposing, or in the lion's share of the numbers, we're talking about people who came here evading our laws, ignoring our laws to come here, whether it's across the Rio Grande or otherwise, overstaying your visas, right? You came here, violated our laws, overstayed your visas, whatever it is. And you have, in this one case, committed Social Security fraud. In another case, whether you're here with legal status or came here illegally, you're engaged in support or otherwise engaged with helping Hamas in this one particular instance. Or perhaps you have been convicted of DUIs and obviously engaging in high-speed chases with respect to the danger posed to Border Patrol and otherwise. So again, just for clarification, this is what we're talking about here. When the average, I'll finish this, then I'll leave it open for the question. When the average person that I represent, if I ask the average person that I represent in the 21st District of Texas, in Central Texas, do you think that any of the individuals, any one individual who came here in violation of our laws, whether they felt they had a reasonable claim to some coverage for asylum or some basis for parole or anything else, but they came here, most people in my district, I don't know how your people in your district feel, would say that individual should be removed immediately. That individual should not be present in the United States at all. But here we're talking about, at least for that class of individuals, we're talking about, again, consequences for Social Security frauds. In other words, we're layering on something on top of that which most average Americans would say we should be removing, deporting, not having them in the United States at all. And then we're coming in and saying on top of that, oh, by the way, I mean, if you commit Social Security fraud, you really shouldn't be here. I mean, I'm just trying to put in perspective kind of the absurdity of the spectrum on which we find ourselves.
Well,
I wonder if the gentleman might comment.
Well, it's pretty simple, actually. These bills are applying to drunk drivers, ID thieves, Hamas operatives, exactly the same provisions that we already apply for visa overstays, violating of non-immigrant status or condition of entry, smuggling aliens, committing marriage fraud, being a drug user or a drug addict, falsely claiming U.S. citizenship, engaging in espionage. We're simply applying the same provisions that apply to aliens who have violated those laws to drunk drivers, ID thieves, and terrorists. I don't think that's too much to ask, but the Democrats do, and that tells us a great deal about the attitudes of the parties on this issue.
So we've got 4 bills here, high-speed chases with respect to Border Patrol agents, protecting ourselves from DUIs, i.e. people who are committing acts of driving under influence or have committed such an act, engaging in Social Security fraud, a fairly significant problem for people if you take someone's identity and steal their hardworking contributions to Social Security, and then no benefits, i.e. you shouldn't be here if you're, I don't know, cavorting with terrorists like Hamas, who endanger the American people and endanger our friends in Israel. So that's the position that we're laying forward in these 4 measures. Is that correct? I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Are there any other members that have questions for this panel? If not, thank you very much for appearing before us today, and the witnesses are excused.
Gary? Always a pleasure, it truly is.
The chair would invite to the witness table Representative Garcia and Representative Jackson Lee for amendments. Very well. Welcome to the Rules Committee. We will take testimony on all of the amendments that you have to offer, and then we may have questions afterwards. So, Ms. Jackson Lee, in seniority, let's start with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me start off by indicating that the amendment that I have is on H.R. 5585. And let me thank the Rules Committee for your courtesies throughout the year for listening to the concerns of members to make legislation better. And that is the intent that we have today, is to make legislation better and to, in fact, realize that with all the discussions that I heard as I was listening here, we would do well to have collaborative work, just as they're doing in the United States Senate, to produce a bill that should draw the support of all of us who are supportive of Americans. I wanted to bring up the title of a bill filed I'll do that as I filed, that was the Save America Comprehensive Immigration Bill, filed in 2007. I filed it and have been filing this bill repeatedly. And the concept that I want to focus on, Mr. Chairman, is that it mentions comprehensive. And that is what we have in these series of bills. It is not a comprehensive approach. It is piece by piece. And you will see us try to make amends for things that we have agreed to as Republicans and Democrats. But I want to go back to what I wanted to start with, which is to offer my deepest sympathy, again, to the family of Border Patrol agent Raul Gonzalez, a Texan, for his loss, the loss of his life in the line of duty. I want to clearly make that known to all of us, that we mourn for his passing and we recognize the service of all of them. But as we go back to trying to make a difference in this country, we would make a difference by doing it comprehensively and listening to people who, one, are in states on the border who have a different and real perspective, and also have been engaged in this process for a long time. So Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the committee, thank you again for this opportunity to speak in support of my amendment to H.R. 5585. My amendment would make 3 changes. First, my amendment makes a technical change to mirror language that appears in existing federal criminal statutes. I'm not reinventing the wheel, which prohibits the commission of various offenses such as assault, murder, and manslaughter perpetrated against officers and employees of the United States and foreign officials while engaged in the performance of their official duties. As currently written, H.R. 5585 would require that the government prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the pursuing Border Patrol agent had the legal authority to engage in the underlying pursuit. In other words, the fact finder would have to determine whether the agent was abiding by laws and regulations in effect at the time of the pursuit. I want to make it better and indicate simply that it was in the performance of his or her official duties. In other words, we wouldn't have that extra burden. My amendment would simply require that the government prove that the Border Patrol agent was within their duties, meaning within the scope of the agent's employment. Second, my amendment would eliminate the minimum mandatory penalties in the bill, which, while maintaining the maximum penalties. To make it very clear, Republicans and Democrats over the years have supported the removing of mandatory minimums. We have had a whole contingent of evangelicals who stood alongside of us and said that mandatory minimums did not fit the 4 corners of the law or the penalties that should be rendered. Like many of my colleagues, I have opposed mandatory minimum penalties, particularly because of the devastating impact these sentencing schemes have inflicted on many Americans, including those who are communities of color. But I think the singular point to know is that it has been people from both parties over the years. And why are we separating now? Mandatory minimum sentences contributed to the mass incarceration of generations of Americans and are the primary reason that the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. Mandatory minimums have been studied extensively and been found to distort rational sentencing systems, discriminate against minorities, waste billions of taxpayer dollars, and quite often violate common sense while failing to reduce crime. Brain trusts, like the Rand Commission, have concluded that mandatory minimum sentences are less effective than discretionary sentencing and far more costly. And so support comes from the Families Against Mandatory Minimums, supported also by evangelicals, the American Bar Association, the Judicial Conference of the United States, and many other organizations. And the Judicial Conference of the United States has reiterated to this body its opposition to mandatory minimum sentencing schemes more than a dozen times, noting these types of penalties severely distort and damage federal sentencing, undermine the U.S. sentencing guidelines mandated by this very Congress to promote fairness and proportionality in federal sentencing and destroy equity and honesty in sentencing, and encouraging coercive charging practices. Finally, my amendment would add an additional data point to the annual report. The immigration status of individuals charged with an offense under the new code section. In the end, the changes proposed in my amendment are narrowly tailored to address glaring deficiencies and do not change the overall mission of this bill. This is when we work together. My amendment considers the many criticisms of mandatory minimum penalties while allowing a judge's discretion to impose informed sentencing to satisfy the purposes and goals of federal sentencing. So I thank the committee again for the opportunity to testify, but more importantly, to present, I think, very instructive changes to this legislation and changes that have been expressed by Republicans and Democrats over the years in the criminal justice system. And I remind us collectively on the bills that we have before us that we are, in many instances, denying due process. And I don't know if we want to pass bills out of the United States Congress that denies due process, even in the immigration footprint. So let me thank you, and I yield back. Thank you.
Representative Garcia, you're recognized for your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to speak today on my amendment to H.R. 6678. My amendment is the Dream and Promise Act. This is a real bipartisan solution for our immigration system, which is broken. Our role as lawmakers is a special one. We are empowered by the Constitution to make laws which are necessary and proper to serve the nation as it changes in whatever form that may be. When issues arise across the country, we must find creative, common sense ways to fix them. Today, our country is home to dreamers, children who were brought to the United States by their parents and grew up here. In their heart, in their mind, and in their soul, they are Americans, except on paper. They only know America is their home. They contribute to society as taxpayers, small business owners, scholars, educators, and aspiring public servants. And during the COVID pandemic, they stepped up as essential workers. They served as doctors, nurses, first responders, and everything that you can imagine to keep our communities healthy and safe. Yet they remain at risk of losing everything after living in this country for their whole life. They are in legal limbo. No family should be separated. By finding common ground and working together to fix our immigration system, Congress can provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers and immigrant families. Mr. Chairman, make no mistake, this is not a partisan issue. Over 70% of Americans favor a law providing permanent legal status to dreamers. Over 70%. I dare say we don't have that kind of popularity on any other issue we face here in Congress. 70% of Americans want dreamers to be citizens. This is a real solution. This is necessary and proper as contemplated by the Constitution. I'm proud to champion H.R. 16, the bipartisan American Dream and Promise Act of 2023, with the support of a diverse bipartisan group of co-leads, including Representatives Chavez de Rimmer, Duarte Salazar, and Commissioner Gonzalez Colon. Compared with similar bills, this bill stands out for its narrow focus with narrow language. It focuses solely on finalizing the simple, legal, and safe pathway to citizenship for those cast into legal limbo because of Congress's own inaction. This is a pragmatic solution which will have a life-changing effect on every district in the nation. Chairman Cole, you have 6,000 dreamers in your state. And as I'm sure Mr. Roy and Mr. Burgess know, if DACA ends in Texas, we would lose 5,000 workers every single month over 2 years, many of them in healthcare, public safety, and teaching positions. So again, this impacts us all. And take it from me, I was born and raised in South Texas, about an hour away from the border. I recognize the importance of securing our borders to protect the integrity of our nation. Passing the Dream and Promise Act of 2023 will alleviate the strain on our immigration enforcement agencies, allowing them to focus their resources on addressing legitimate security concerns and keeping our country safe, while also acknowledging our responsibility to treat individuals seeking refuge with dignity and respect. Congress serves as their only hope for relief. So it is necessary and proper. We need to find a permanent solution so they can focus on raising the next generation of doctors, teachers, and leaders in this country. This bill passed the House in March 2021 in the last Congress, as well as in June of 2019 in the 116th Congress. With your help, I look forward to getting this bill passed in the House again and get it signed into law. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I reserve.
Thank the gentlelady for her testimony. I have no questions. Turn to the vice chair and no questions. No questions. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania, have any questions? Gentleman from Pennsylvania?
I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just ask Lee to enter into the record a series of articles which notes the economic benefits that our DACA recipients receive. The DACA recipients, both for Social Security and Medicare, the article DACA boosts recipients' well-being and economic contributions, the article the demographic and economic impacts of DACA recipients.
Without objection. Gentlelady, yield back. Thank you very much. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions. Gentleman from New York. Thank you very much. We want to thank both of you for your testimony, and thanks for coming to the Rules Committee, and our witnesses are excused. Thank you. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 5585, H.R. 6678, H.R. 6679, or H.R. 6976? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion. The chair will now be in a receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 5585, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act, a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides for 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary or their respective designees. The rule provides an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 118-21 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed. In the report may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for the division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for the consideration of H.R. 6678, the Consequences for Social Security Fraud Act, under a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 118-23 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. The rule makes in order only the amendment printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment printed in Part B of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 6679, the No Immigration Benefits for Hamas Terrorists Act, under a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The bill provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 118-24 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary or their respective designees. The rule makes in order only the amendment printed in Part C of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable only for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against amendment printed in Part C of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for the consideration of H.R. 6976, the Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act, under a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the Rules Committee print 118-22 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary or their respective designees. The rule makes in order only the amendment printed in Part D of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall not be debatable for the time specified in the report, shall be debated for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment printed in Part D of the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order amendment number 4 to H.R. 5585 and amendment number 3 to H.R. 6678, offered by Representatives Escobar and Correa respectively. Mr. Chair, these amendments would bring H.R. 5585 and H.R. 6678 more in line with current law and the rule of law by requiring an individual to be convicted of a crime before rendering the individual deportable. Apart from a few exceptions, the grounds for deportation require a criminal conviction to make a non-citizen deportable. However, neither of these bills require an individual to be convicted or even charged with a crime, violating some bedrock principles of fairness and due process. And given what we've seen with respect to information exchange and knowledge with respect to what folks under duress situations are sometimes informed about their rights or lack thereof, I think it's really important that these amendments be made. So I urge a yes vote on my motion, and I yield back.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. No. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fischbach.
No.
Mrs. Fischbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Norman. No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy.
No.
Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to it. Are there further amendments? Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
The American Dream and Promise Act that creates a pathway to citizenship for eligible dreamers, TPS, and DED holders. Let's remember who the dreamers are. These are the children who were brought. Let's remember who the dreamers are. These are the children who were brought to the United States and have gone to school with our children, who have gone on to earn degrees and participate in our economy in an incredible, meaningful way. Each of us around this dais knows dreamers, I am sure. We know that they work in our states and they contribute to the economy and vibrancy of our economy. Indeed, they have contributed $27.9 billion in wages. They have paid in $2.1 billion in Social Security taxes, even though they do not have the ability to draw down Social Security. Americans support the Dream and Promise Act. 70% of Americans would like us to get this done. Let us show the courage and put it on the House floor so that our members can vote on whether they support our dreamers or not. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler.
No.
Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fischbach.
No.
Mrs. Fischbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Norman. No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy.
No.
Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern. Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Yes.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
The noes have it, the amendment's not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? Hearing no requests for further amendments, the question is on the motion to report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler. Aye. Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Aye. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Norman. Aye. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Aye. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin. Aye. Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy. Aye. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon. No. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. No. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
And the ayes have it. The motion to report's agreed to. Accordingly, Dr. Burgess will be managing the rule for the majority.
I'll be doing it for the.
My friend, Mr. McGovern, will be managing for the minority. With that, we are adjourned for the evening.